guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ishi, you are in Ishi Time, and today I am here with part 2 of my July wrap-up. So I read a total of 18 books in July, and I decided to split my wrap-up into 2 videos. The first one that I have already posted was books that I did not like, and this one is about books that I liked. How this video is going to be structured is that I'm going to start out with my 3-star reads, and then go to 4 stars, and then move on to 5 stars. So saving the best for last. Anyways, let's get right into it. We Contain Multitudes by Sarah Henstra. This is an arc, so I don't know how similar this is to like the published version, but I'm sure it's like pretty similar. This book is about 2 boys, Adam and Joe, who have to write letters back and forth to each other for their English class. I actually really like this book. Joe is funny and he's so like endearing. And then there's Adam, who I don't like, but the way his character is unraveled slowly throughout this book is honestly very fascinating and well done. This book is told entirely in a letter format, which I didn't really find to be necessary some of the time. I think this book would have been really great if it had been like a mixture of third-person perspective and letters. I also want to give a trigger warning for domestic abuse and drug use if that is something you need to know. Overall, I do think that this book was very well done. All the characters are fleshed out really well, and I did enjoy this book overall, even though I was iffy about some parts of it. Next, I have Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. I've never really liked the story of Peter Pan, even when I was little. I just think Wendy is really annoying. Imagine you're swept off into this magical land and you can suddenly fly. Like, is that really the time in your life that you decide to be responsible and like act like a mom and like not have a fun and just be like an overall buzzkill? Like, I don't know what's up with Wendy, but I don't like her. And it was fine, so I gave it 3 stars. Next, I have The Dragon with the Chocolate Heart by Stephanie Burgess. This book is good. It's about a dragon named Adventurine who drinks a potion and gets turned into a human. And then as a human, she wants to become a chocolatier and make the best chocolate. It was interesting. If I was an 8-year-old, I would have really enjoyed the story and I would have given it 5 out of 5 stars. But because I am not an 8-year-old, it was fine, guys. It was a children's story. I'm not a child, so I didn't enjoy it, but like, Aurora Rising by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. I am a big fan of both these authors because I loved the Illuminae files, so I was really looking forward to reading this one. I'm actually really surprised how different this formatting is from those books because, I don't know, for some reason I thought that it would be formatted in a similar manner. I loved the story and I loved the plot. I loved that all these characters hated each other in the beginning, but by the end they were like closest family. Cal and Finian are my all-time favorite characters. They're so sassy and they always just have like a wisecrack to make. I love them so much and they were always there to ease the tension and they made me laugh. The world building is great. We get to meet so many new alien species. This book just kind of put me in a really space type of mood. I watched so many space documentaries after reading this book. I had a dream that I went to space and I woke up just like wanting to go to space. Elon Musk, I know you watch my booktube channel. Please send me to space. There were definitely things I did not like about this book. This book had 7 perspectives in it, and I felt like not all of them were fully developed yet. Some sounded exactly the same to me, especially Kat and Scarlet, and the only way I could tell the difference between the two was that Scarlet called Tyler baby brother instead of Tyler. I also did not like Kat at all. She was so annoying, and every time there was a chapter from her perspective, I was like counting the pages until it ended. I loved Cal from the moment we met him. So naturally, when we got a chapter from his perspective, I inhaled that. I absorbed that into my very soul. The next chapter we get from his perspective does not sound like his first chapter at all. So the character voices are not really established at all, and I just felt like that bit of the writing needed a bit more work. But other than that, I really did like this book. The next book I read that I gave 4 stars to was Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. This book is about a girl named Mia whose father is killed by the Republic. So to seek revenge, she goes to this assassin school to learn how to become an assassin so she can assassinate the people who killed her father. I loved and hated this book. But first, talking about the things that I loved the characters. I felt like all the characters were really well fleshed out, and each of the side characters had their own goals and dreams. Like, they were never just there to further Mia's own storyline or to further the plot of the book. All of these side characters had a reason that they were there at this assassin school, and I feel like that really added a richness to the story. I loved the overall plot as well, especially near the end. It got a bit crazy and I was like, whew, boy. But I will say that the plot was a bit slow in the beginning because it took me like a good 100 pages to finally get interested in the story. I did say that all the side characters were really well fleshed out, but I can't say the same for the villains. I don't really know if I can qualify these characters as villains. First of all, they are honestly just doing their job because they work for the government, so obviously they have to catch criminals, and Mia is a criminal along with everyone else in her assassin school. So I don't know, I can't hate these villains because they're just doing their job. Maybe that will change in the next book, which I haven't read yet, but like maybe they become more evil, we will see. I did not really vibe with the writing style either. The writing was very dense and I had to read sentences multiple times just to kind of start to make sense of them. The figurative language used is also outrageous. Many of the metaphors used were profane and obscene, but it really seemed to me like it was obscene for the sake of being obscene and not because it really added anything to the plot. Personally, the worst part of this book were the footnotes. I know many people love the footnotes, but every time I saw a footnote coming, I was like, oh. There were pages in this book where the footnotes were longer than the actual text in the book. Much of the footnotes didn't really seem to have anything to do with the plot itself. A lot of it was just world building, and like, I don't know, like why wasn't the world building just integrated into the story? Like, anyways, the next book is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, also a 4-star read. This book is about a circus that appears out of nowhere. It's here when yesterday it was not. Our main characters are Celia and Marco, and they're fated to compete, but they're not really told what this competition entails. So they're just kind of like going into this competition blind, and their decisions during this competition kind of affects the fate of everyone else who's involved in the circus. I really did like the writing style and the ambiance of this book. It was very aesthetically pleasing. The descriptions were very vivid and it made me feel like I was there. But at the same time, there was a lot of flowery and descriptive language used to describe things that weren't really important to the plot of the story, but it did add to the overall vibe of the book, so I can't say I hated it entirely. I said this in my reading vlog, but I thought that the experience of reading this book is very similar to what I imagined the experience of attending the circus would actually be like, which I think is a huge compliment towards this author's writing style. It was written in a style that really conveyed the strangeness and eeriness and the mystery of the circus, and I really enjoyed that part of the story. The one thing I did not like, however, was the fact that we didn't really get to know the characters as well. First of all, there are a lot of perspectives. We start out with Prospero the Enchanter, and then the Grey Man, I forgot his name, Alexander, and then there's Celia and Marco, obviously, and then there's Bailey, and then there's Chandresh. Actually, he's Indian, so it's probably like Chandresh. Can't believe I just said that with an American accent. Anyways, because there's this sense of mystery surrounding this whole book, there's a sense of mystery around the characters as well, so we don't really get to know them and we don't really get to know everything it is that they can do. Usually when we don't know the characters well in a book, even after reading it for like 500 pages, I give the book a low star rating. But I think the mystery surrounding these characters added to the book instead of taking away from it, which is why I gave it 4 stars. Overall, I did really enjoy this book. Next, we have Maximum Ride by James Patterson. This was actually a reread, or like a reread. I read this book many times, and I love it. It was like a middle school favorite for me, and going back into it, I hope that I still liked it, and I still did. This book is about a group of kids who were experimented on when they were little, and now they have wings. They're on the run from the school, which is the place that experimented on them, and this book is just them on the run. And this is the graphic novel version, so it was very manga-like, and I honestly loved this book so much, and I gave it 4 stars. It is a bit juvenile though. There are some moments when the characters do things and you're like, but then you remember that they're like 12. This book is definitely not for everybody. I'm definitely biased because it's one of my favorite books ever, but I do recommend that you check it out if you are finding yourself interested in the synopsis. The next book I have is The Near Witch by V.E. Schwab. I gave it 4 stars and I made my sister read it as well, and she also loved it a lot. This book is about a town named Near where there are no strangers, but then one day a stranger shows up, a boy who seems to fade like smoke, and suddenly children are disappearing from their beds. And obviously everyone in the small town wants to blame him. This book is really strange, eerie, quiet. It's very atmospheric. And I'm gonna say right off the bat that even though I loved it a lot, this book is not for everybody. If you're into a lot of action and a fast-moving plot, then this book is not it. The plot in this book is fairly slow. It kind of like takes its time, but not in like, I think I'm gonna die waiting for something to happen kind of way, but it's just very like gradual. And I personally really like it. The magic system kind of in this book is not really well defined either, so if you're the type of person who needs to know how things work, you might be a bit frustrated reading this book because that really isn't explained. If I were to describe this book in one way, it would be like a strange dream. Like, you know those dreams that don't really make sense? Like you wake up on your couch but suddenly you're on a boat, but then suddenly you're flying but also sleeping, and your dog is actually a cat, and you look up at the sky but the sky is actually the ocean. Like, it's strange and haunting, and you need to take what this book gives you instead of demanding this book to give you more. The one thing I did not like about this book was the portrayal of women. Like, I'm tired of that whole setting in books where women can't do anything, they have to listen to men, and then the main character is this like edgy female character and she like does all these things that only boys can do. Like, I'm honestly tired of it. But the fact that this book was written in like 2011 and 2012, back when those type of books were popular, so I guess it makes sense, but I didn't enjoy it. My last 4-star book is An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. This book is about a portrait artist named Isabel who paints mortal sorrow in the eyes of one of her fair folk clients. So he shows up and he whisks her away to stand her for trial because painting mortal sorrow in his eyes was like the worst thing she could do because it makes him appear weak. So they go off and then they suddenly find themselves on this journey, and then they find themselves in love, which is not a spoiler because it says so in the synopsis. The main fair folk guy's name is Rook, which is an amazing name, I'm just gonna say. Isabel as a main character is clever, but nothing about her really stands out to me that much. My favorite thing about this book was the portrayal of fairies. I have read all the ACOTAR books. I have also read Cruel Prince and Wicked King, and the way that fairies are depicted in this book is very different from how they are depicted in those ones. And I honestly thought it was a very refreshing change from the classic like stereotypical fae. The fairies in this book are haunting and just horrifying kind of, and it was really interesting to read about them. I also loved the dynamic between Rook and Isabel. They have this like back and forth banter going on that I honestly really love. Also, the different fairies we meet in this book are vastly different from one another. Like, they're not all just made out of the same fairy mold. Each of them have their own goals and their own ambitions, and each of them do things that reflect their personality in unique ways. I also really enjoyed reading about the enchantments in this book and how Isabel bargains for enchantments. Overall, I thought that this was a very fun read. I know a lot of people don't like this book because they call it an ACOTAR ripoff, but I don't really think that's true. Like, there were a lot of things in this book that were similar to ACOTAR, such as there were like the courts, like spring court, winter court, summer court, but other than that, like the fairy world is vastly different from the one in ACOTAR. So I personally really enjoyed this book and I gave it 4 stars. Moving on to our 5-star reads, I have The Language of Thorns by Leigh Bardugo. This is a book of short stories told in the Grishaverse. I really wanted to read this book because Nikolai, one of my most favorite characters ever, is compared to the Too Clever Fox, which is a story in this book. The story did not disappoint. I really liked all the stories in this book. Some I liked more than others, but I did overall enjoy all of them. My favorite story was the one about the toy maker, and I think my least favorite was the first one, which was Amaya and the Thornwoods. I really got like bestiality vibes from it. Like, it seemed to be like a Beauty and the Beast sort of retelling, but the monster was literally just a monster. It was not like a human turned into a monster type of situation. Like, the monster she falls in love with is literally just a monster, so I did not like that. Other than that, I did like this book. Next, I have Voices, The Final Hours of Joan of Arc by David Eliot. This is a book of poetry, so it's definitely not for everybody, and it's also very different from like contemporary poetry. Like, don't compare this to Rupee Kaur. Some of my friends did not like this book at all, but I personally have always been interested in the story of Joan of Arc. We learned about her in history, and I even did my own research about her. And I think that this book definitely conveyed her story really well. If you know nothing about Joan of Arc, I don't know if this book will do like a great job at telling you much, but because I already was very familiar with that story, I found it easy to make connections, which is why I like the story. But I wouldn't recommend it to everybody. If you do have an interest in Joan of Arc and in poetry though, do check it out. Then we have Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. This is possibly the best book I have read this month. I honestly don't really know if I can give you a proper summary because there's just too much going on. But basically, this book takes place in a world where people who die as heroes come back to live as gods. So our main character is sent to another kingdom to marry like one of these god kings. And in that country, there is color everywhere, whereas the place that she comes from, the people don't really wear color. And like the more color a person can see and perceive, the more power that they have. I really don't know how to explain this book because there's just so much in it. I loved the characters, Ciri and even the God King. I loved them both so much, and their story was just, it was very satisfying. And then I did not like Vivenna at all. I hated her so much throughout this book, but it was not the sort of hate that made me hate the book. It was the sort of hate that made me hate this character. And then I realized that if this book can make me hate this character so much, this book must be very, very good. And throughout the course of this very, very big book, I began to understand Vivenna, and by the end, I really appreciated her and I really liked her, which is honestly some great character development. I also really liked Vasher. The end just blew my mind, and I honestly really recommend this book if you are looking to get into high fantasy or if you are looking to get into any of Brandon Sanderson's books as well. I love this book so much. Next is Stardust by Neil Gaiman. I gave this book 5 stars also, and I really loved this book. I could not put this book down, and I read it in one day. Okay, so the main character's name is Tristan, like Tristan, Tristan. I read this entire book calling him Tristan in my head. And on literally like the last chapter of this book, I looked a bit closer and I'm like, but yeah, that doesn't matter. This book takes place in a town called Wall, where there's this wall, and on the other side of this wall is like a magical place that people are not allowed to go to. So our main character is Tristan, and he promises Victoria, the girl he loves apparently, that he will go get a fallen star for her that has fallen on the other side of the wall. So he goes on this journey. This book was written in a way that makes me believe everything I'm reading. Like, it made me believe that if I travel to the edge of the world, I will really come across a town named Wall, on the other side of which there will be a magical land. The writing style is breathtaking and flawless, and it really makes me want to get into Neil Gaiman's other books. At first, I found this book to be entirely plot-driven because it took me quite a while to familiarize myself with the characters, but once I did get to know the characters, I loved them a lot. One thing I really loved about these characters was that they felt very natural and real. They didn't fall into any sort of trope, and honestly, these felt like the people I would meet on the street. Like, they were real people, and I appreciated that. I also went and watched the movie after I finished reading the book, and the movie is very different from the book, but I did enjoy the movie as well. But yeah, I do recommend. Last but definitely not the least, I have The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I have nothing bad to say about this book. I love this book so much. I would give it 50 stars if I could. I did not read this book for a really long time because I thought it was overhyped, and I thought that it would not live up to all that hype that BookTube has created around this book. But once I read it, I was like, why did I not read this earlier? This book is about Evelyn Hugo and Monique, who is a magazine writer. Evelyn Hugo is a really famous person. She used to be a really famous actress back in her day, but she is older now, and she has asked Monique to write her biography for her. So we follow Monique while she's interviewing Evelyn about her life, and then we follow Evelyn's life as she's growing up and as she becomes famous in Hollywood. This book is heartbreaking, and it just made me feel all the emotions, and my heart was everywhere, and it was breaking and like crying, but also being happy for Evelyn in the end. Just everything about this book I loved. If you have not read this book already, please read it. That is all I have for this video. I am very happy about my reading month. I am very proud that I read all these books. So yeah, I am very happy. Please like and subscribe if you want. My name is Ishi. Thank you for spending time with me, and I hope your day is as wonderful as you are.